But what if I told you that these were not the same show? And I mean, that makes sense. After all, one takes place in outer space in a post-apocalyptic world, while the other takes place in New Jersey.
Worthless.
And one has antagonists which range from episode to episode, from random street thugs to hot grannies and even monkeys. While the other, despite shows having the same director and initially having very similar vibes, they are vastly different. Because another difference between the two shows is how memorable they are. Because most people remember Cowboy Bebop as a cult classic, having came out almost 3 decades ago? Oh my god, am I old! But Lazarus only came out in April of last year, and it kind of feels like people have already forgotten about it or didn't even know about it in the first place. And I mean, to be honest, I didn't even know about this show myself until I randomly scrolled Mappa's catalog one day and discovered it. And after having seen it for myself, I just have to wonder, why? This show is genuinely really damn good. The premise about Dr. Foreskinner poisoning all the planned bees so that the entire world would eventually end in 3 years, bringing together a crew of mostly badass dudes to take him down, culminated with amazing action comparable to Tom Cruise, all packaged into a 13-episode roller coaster in a genuinely fantastic looking futuristic world. Just makes me wonder how people managed to forget about the show so quickly. But maybe we just need to break this down a bit to understand why. So what even is Lazarus in the first place? Well, Lazarus is an anime that takes place in the year 2052, which essentially revolves around the Long Island Man. Flashback a bit, and this man, Dr. Foreskinner, believed that global warming would destroy the Arctic in a few years. But in his attempts to convince the world leaders to take action, they basically decided that their priorities were better spent donating trillions to yahoo.com.
You serve no purpose in life. Your purpose in life is to be in my stream sucking on my dick.
So in response, he decides to make the miracle pain medicine that he was about to release, Hopna, have a severe side effect. 3 years after it was taken, a 30-day countdown would begin until the patients who took them could see nothing but galaxy donations on their TikTok streams. And the only way to prevent this from happening was to find him so that he could reveal the cure and save humanity. Little did everyone know, however, that this would become the biggest hide-and-seek game of their lives. Even though literally the entire time, bro was just hiding behind the local 7-Eleven because, I mean, look, the pizza is low-key gas as fuck! A Suicide Squad archetype group consisting of absolute GOATs such as Axel, my Tom Cruise aura farming Spike offspring king, Doug, who is basically just here because he got caught jaywalking, who can also snipe like he's fucking John Wick for some reason. Like, what are they feeding you kids at Princeton University? Because this is just crazy. The modern day Megan Fox, who is also blonde and Russian, like, sweet lord, baby, jeez! The hacker girl, who single-handedly took on the annoying kettle-corn wizard hacker to save humanity. No, seriously, despite this girl's little bit of screen time every time she says hardcore, it makes me want to commit ungodly levels of foreskinning. Like, shut the f*** up! And the rich femboy, who is basically just the Walmart version of Fred from Big Hero 6, who has drones and shit. That's kind of it though. And together, they will uncover the mysteries of Skinner, which will eventually lead them behind the 7-Eleven where he is located. Could that be Skinner? Nah, let's just move on. Oh, come on! And what I can say about this show is that it is not only beautifully animated with fantastic choreography, but the action is just amazing. And the reason for this, of course, is because finding Foreskinner isn't exactly a straight foreskin path, and other gooners want to get a piece of that world-saving pie. such as random street thugs who didn't get paid for their concrete contracting job, or the random crypto bros who sold off a bunch of Hopna stock right before Skinner made the announcement of his AIDS-inducing trap, or those dicks from corporate who decided they would much rather let the world burn than to risk their PNG files getting leaked. And as we progress through this show, we slowly shift from an episodic format with missions to find Skinner, which inevitably lead to a dead end, to a more serious tone, where the Lazarus group essentially have to slow down their mission and defend themselves from the other parties trying to cockblock their mission. But that just ties directly into the main point of the entire show in the first place. Because believe it or not, Skinner didn't just decide on a whim one day that the entirety of humanity needed to be wiped off the face of the earth like he was on some Ultron level of a crash out, but rather to reflect if humanity, despite its many flaws and conflicting motivations, could come together to fight against the world-ending calamity thrust upon them. Or maybe just succumb to its own greed and watch the world burn. That is the question that this series tries to answer. But how was the overall execution of this? With the benefit of hindsight, I'm kind of mixed on this opinion, to be honest. Because on one hand, I don't think it would be a good thing to find Skinner instantaneously. I think the investigation process actually going in multiple different directions actually feels quite realistic. It feels like they're uncovering something with substance rather than just following obvious breadcrumbs. Even though they did literally miss him in episode 2, but that's beside the fact. Additionally, I don't think it's really a bad thing for the Lazarus group to encounter roadblocks. It just makes the story more interesting. And having this span across a 13-episode series doesn't exactly make it much of a slow pacing problem either. However, something that makes this show feel like it keeps going on pointless side quests, in my opinion, is the lore. Now, initially when it does come to the lore of the show, it actually does kind of pull it off well, because the show is firstly called Lazarus. The group is literally called Lazarus. So clearly there is some sort of connection to biblical lore. And if you don't know about the show, then you might interpret this as the rebirth of humanity, or maybe Skinner setting up an elaborate message to be uncovered throughout the hunt he set up, such as the Seventh Trumpet or the Mega Church cult. Because in fact, that is exactly what I thought when I initially started watching this show. But in actuality, and go to the timestamp if you plan to watch the show and don't want to be spoiled about this because it's actually kind of really essential to the plot. Don't worry, I'll wait. Okay, anyway, the main ties to some divine element being in the show is the airport incident. Because all members of the Lazarus group were there, and it actually died because of the event involving Hopna being released. However, all of them managed to get revived. Therefore, they rose from the dead, like Lazarus, and their formation in the group was no coincidence. And this being foreshadowed since the beginning of the show, from each of the characters explaining their own background about Hopna to its eventual payoff is honestly really great foreshadowing. Something that doesn't make as much sense to me, however, is Skinner's investment into microslots. So let me break this down a bit. He basically decided one day to invest into an AI whose sole purpose was to act like a god with his own egotistical behavioral patterns. Now, if you've seen any other robotic sci-fi movie or know literally anything about ChatGPT whatsoever, then you might know why this is a terrible idea. And we're supposed to believe that Skinner is a genuinely great guy before this entire Hopna situation happened, but this whole religious AI cult thing happened decades before. He literally risked an entire culture growing up under an experimental ChatGPT god just cuz? And we get to see the direct consequences of this happening because the hacker girl actually grew up in this environment. And it doesn't exactly take a genius to realize that the average Catholic church family is low-key insane and will literally burn themselves at the stake the literal second that they think the second coming of Christ is coming. Now, maybe it could be said that Skinner was starting to lose hope for humanity and he was trying to, I don't know, find another way to resolve their problems, like through alternative mechanisms. But dude, my brother in Christ, Google Gemini is not going to let you hit. Like, honestly, this is almost as comical as the Pope's ceremony being written by AI. What the fuck? Hundreds of people almost died so that you could plant an Easter egg about your 4 islands. God dang it. And the worst part, that is literally it. All this setup just for an Easter egg for the 4 islands. And I kind of find it ironic too, given the entire point of the story is basically humanity fighting itself, with Skinner literally being a direct hypocrite in that exact same question, while also literally playing God and causing the potentially world-ending calamity in the first place. Now, I'm at least somewhat willing to let this go because maybe the AI cult episode wasn't for me. But something I am never going to let go of is the dock incident. So basically what happens here is that Prime Day Megan Fox, after having explored the 4 islands, accidentally runs into her ex-lover on complete accident. So you're telling me that you guys just so happen to be at some random dock somewhere in the world and you just so happen to find each other? Like you've been chasing a dead ghost for years on Russian waters. Like how did you even— Alexandra, you never turned off your Snapchat live location. Oh. Fuck. Like never mind the fact that Lazarus just made headlines at the Crypto Bros Club, or the fact that there was probably public information about Skinner's potential whereabouts regarding these waters. Yeah, no, they just so happened to run into each other like this is the local frickin' Aldi. Like, sure, this does lead into some legitimate lore about Prime Day Megan Fox, such as the fact that she was a Russian spy and abandoned her post to try and live her own life. But, dude, just the way we got here in the first place, even with the benefit of hindsight, is just way too convenient. Because it also conveniently leads the government to being on Lazarus's ass for approximately 2 seconds because they had an international conflict just to save one of their members, which also leads to some actual good conflicts for the rest of the show. But just the way we got here in the first place is just so weird. And what pains me about this is that the rest of the execution about the secret organization being after Lazarus, though rushed, at least makes sense. They don't want the group of Lazarus to discover too much about their illegal activities and expose them for the world to see. They even go so far that they send an assassin after Axel. Speaking of which, what is the actual lore behind Axel? Arguably the most interesting character in the entire show. Well, it ain't much. In fact, I'd say that Axel is the literal blueprint for the problems with Lazarus. Because when you look at him, he is really damn cool. He's an absolute badass, swaggy as all hell, but we aren't exactly given a reason or time to know why. Like, he has one of the greatest fights in the entire series against Sun Jin-Woo, but I can't help but to feel that we got robbed out of knowing much more about Axel outside of the fact like he was a prisoner that got experimented on and he was involved in local gang fights. Like, look, you're trying to tell me that this assassin trained under the Hundun program specifically to be turned into a ruthless killing machine is only equal to Axel? Like, this could have been the perfect opportunity to reveal some of Axel's past and maybe give a good reason for why he is so OP in the first place, but no. We can even see multiple instances in this fight that would be fantastic foreshadowing to show how Axel clearly has some connection to this guy or the same program that trained him. Like, maybe I'm reading into it too much, but how does Axel just casually catch this freaking whip weapon like it's nothing? Like, he's seen it before. But going for the more obvious example, he literally has a necklace that connects to the same program. But the payoff for this stupid necklace is that we just learned some basic lore about some creature dying to show how the assassin is no longer a monster in his final moments? Like, I care about Axel, not this friggin' guy. One step further is all the show needed to go in order to make Axel's lore feel much more expanded upon, but it just doesn't. And it feels this way for the rest of the show as well. Being condensed into 13 episodes unfortunately makes a lot of the development for these characters feel rushed. We get the concept and the surface level perspective of what each character is going through, but we don't go any further. Axel doesn't have a backstory despite being the most interesting character in the entire show. Doug doesn't even get a backstory apart from him getting kicked out of Princeton University. The AI cult was apparently supposed to last more than one episode so that the lore could have been expanded upon. And hell, if we had more episodes to expand upon the second half of the story's conflict, then maybe the show and its characters would have felt more complete. Maybe it would have made the romance between Axel and Christine actually feel authentic. Like, though I was so hyped for this, it still just feels like an absolute ass pull. But what is the overall message that we should take away from this show? Well, it's quite simple. It's basically just the fact that humanity is constantly at war with itself, and sometimes people just want to ease some of that pain. And I feel like the narration they give in the first 5 episodes is a prime example of this. Because pessimistically, Doug has always wondered how the world would come to an end, but he never really expected it to be from a world-saving medicine. Prime Day Megan Fox wonders why suffering and grieving should exist in the first place. Why can't humanity just go on having fun without a single care in the world? Walmart Fred Loki just wants to get high. And I'm starting to think that his domestic violence sister was right. Elaine just wanted to escape sadness. And Axel took Hopna just because he was curious to see if it actually worked. But after having done the social experiment of bashing his head against his cell, he realized that he still feels pain, so the effects of the Hopna probably doesn't work. Which kind of makes me wonder how Hopna was supposed to work in the first place, because it's pretty obvious that the people in the series still feel pain despite having taken it. So, but the question about whether humanity can save itself is simply maybe. Because if you think about Lazarus in itself, it could be looked at as some divine intervention, because the group of Lazarus is ultimately what saved humanity from themselves. Now, it isn't a perfect message, and even Skinner ends up being a massive hypocrite in all of this, but what should be taken away from this is how humanity has problems, and they won't just magically go away with some miracle cure. The show is a snapshot of the uphill battle that needs to be fought time and time again in order to keep humanity afloat. But it isn't all doom and gloom either. There are good people. There is hope for humanity, even if it is just a small bit. Even if it has to come from supposed criminals. And yeah, there are aspects of the story that are flawed, and there are some parts that are incomplete and could have been expanded upon. And though I believe a lot of this could be addressed with the second season, I don't really find it likely with the series. But you know what? Never say never. Regardless of how it may have ended up, however, it was a fun ride while it lasted. And if you haven't seen the show for yourself, I honestly couldn't recommend it enough, because it is really damn entertaining. But that is all. Thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.